And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January the 20th day of this new year. Just 345 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays and observances. Take a walk outside day. You know, folks have literally been taking a walk outside since the beginning of human history. And ever since people have made the habit of living indoors, it's been a delight to go outside. It's Penguin Awareness Day. Learn about those birds through documentaries and get up close and personal at your local zoo. National Cheese Lovers Day. National Coffee Break Day. Well, it can sometimes be tempting to work right through that coffee break to get more done. Taking a break can be an important part of staying happy, healthy, and motivated. And a National Day of Acceptance through strength and resilience and determination. Almost anybody can overcome challenges. National Camcorder Day. Capture life's greatest moments with a handheld memory machine. National Butter Crunch Day. That irresistible toffee nut sweetness. National Disc Jockey Day. Play those records. Rid the world of fad disease and gimmicks. And also fad diets. Artis Mundi. Farmhouse Breakfast Week. Savoring a satisfying morning feast. Relishing diverse flavors that energize and start the day on a high note. Cancer Talk Week. Talk about the signs of cancer. No Name Calling Week. National Fresh Squeezed Juice Week. Hunt for Happiness Week. And Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. Famous people born on this date. Evan Peters, David Lynch, Buzz Aldrin, and Rainn Wilson. Well, yesterday was a milestone day. We published our 110th book. You can go to Amazon, go to Kindle, look up Ken Hudnall, and see all the new books we brought out for your enjoyment. We've done it on every topic you can imagine. And you never know what new stories we're going to come up with. Well, yesterday, we were talking about Matthew Bevan and his hacking that got him in trouble with Scotland Yard. Dateline, well, a year before Bevan got arrested, Dateline NBC, that bastion of truth and justice, ran a story that paralleled what Bevan was soon destined to do. This show aired October 27th, 1992. Revealed something viewers found astonishing that for the government was a matter of major concern. One section of that show wasn't just about hacking, but it was actually about hacking UFO-related data. One of the hackers, whose identity NBC hid, revealed what he'd found while fishing around the computer banks of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Not only that, NBC had access to the actual files the hacker had downloaded. With such priceless material, in hand, they chose to show it on screen. Well, interestingly enough, I was so involved in trying to get that segment out to the listeners that I didn't do the news segment. Just got an email pointing it out. And so we're going to stop at the moment on our main topic and go back and do the news. Well, Minnesota Attorney General dismisses the FACE Act. That's F-A-C-E Act. Concerns after anti-ICE agitators storm a church. Well, now what's wrong? Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison denies Don Lemon and ICE protesters violated the FACE Act as the DOJ is looking at charges. Ellison is rejecting assertions that the anti-ICE protesters that stormed a church in his state over the weekend broke the federal law the Justice Department has cited as having been potentially violated. DOJ officials say they're looking into whether the agitators who disrupted services at St. Paul's City's church on Sunday violated the FACE Act and the Ku Klux Klan Act. Now, the FACE Act makes it a federal crime with potentially steep fines and jail time to use or threaten to use a force to injure, intimidate, or interfere with a person seeking reproductive health services, with a person lawfully trying to exercise the First Amendment rights of religious freedom at a place of religious worship. Also prohibits intentional property damage to a facility providing reproductive health services or a place of religious worship. The Ku Klux Klan Act makes it a federal crime for individuals to deny citizens their civil rights. Well, appearing on ex-CNN host Don Lemon's YouTube show, Ellison insisted the FACE Act only pertains to reproductive rights. And the FACE Act, by the way, is designed to protect the rights of people seeking reproductive rights so that people for a religious reason can't just use religion to break into women's reproductive health centers, Ellison told Lemon. How they're stretching either of these laws to apply to people who protest in a church over the behavior of religious leaders beyond him, he said. Lemon found himself had been swept up in the controversy as he provided embedded reporting for City's church documenting the chaos that erupted. While the liberal host maintained that his actions are protected by the First Amendment as a journalist, Harriet DeHalen, Justice Department Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, suggested Lemon's participation was legal. Now, it's interesting to note that the Justice Department is trying to protect people's civil rights here when I've gone to them numerous times about issues and been absolutely ignored. I don't even get a response. I guess I don't count since I speak English relatively well, and I'm not an undocumented immigrant. If I was, it'd be down here with the National Guard. Well, a judge and his wife were shot in broad daylight in Indiana, sparking a massive multi-agency investigation. Maybe you have to be one of God's anointed to get help from the government. Judge and his wife were injured in a shooting Sunday afternoon in Lafayette, Indiana, prompting a multi-agency investigation involving local, state, and federal law enforcement. Lafayette Police Department said Judge Stephen Meyer was shot in the arm and his wife Kimberly Meyer was shot in the hip at their home on Mill Pond Lane about 2:15 in the afternoon. Police said shell casings are recovered at the scene and both victims have got medical treatment and are listed in stable condition. Shooting remains an active investigation involving multiple agencies, including the Lafayette Police Department, the Indiana State Police, the Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Office, the West Lafayette Police Department, and Tippecanoe County Prosecutor's Office, and those supporters of freedom and individuality, the FBI. Now, if he wasn't one of God's anointed, they'd give him some Band-Aids and send him home. Well, Minneapolis software engineers were mistaken for ICE agents while eating lunch and were harassed by an anti-ICE crowd. A group of software engineers are showered with insults and accused of being pedophiles after they were mistakenly accused of being the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies while trying to eat lunch in Minneapolis. The men, all white males dressed casually in sweatshirts and jackets, were eating lunch at Clancy's Deli when one of them got on an alert on an anti-ICE signal chat telling members that plainclothes agents were at the restaurant. That's according to the Alpha News. That person who got the message on the Southwest Minneapolis Rapid Response chats aligned politically with the anti-ICE calls. One of the engineers who gave his name as Lee told the outlet. His friend was shocked. He's on the anti-ICE side politically, lives nearby, and he's eaten there before, and suddenly he's seeing messages saying that we're ICE. After the alert was shared, dozens of anti-ICE agitators flocked to the restaurant and peered into the window. That's according to a video filmed by one of the men. Once the group left, they were met on the street with derision by the crowd. Folks are yelling obscenities and carrying on in an insane manner, which seems to be typical for anti-ICE demonstrators. Let's see. According to Lee Carter, President Trump's approval ratings reveal what legacy media refuses to see. Tuesday, January 20th, that's today, folks, marks 1 year since Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office. 1 year of executive orders, foreign policy shockwaves, and immigration crackdowns, and a governing style that never once tried to soften its edges. And after 1 year, the same headline seems to be seen everywhere. President Trump is unpopular. Approval in the low 40s, disapproval in the mid 50s. That verdict, according to the political industrial complex, is clear. But 1 year in, it's worth asking a more uncomfortable question. What if the polls aren't telling us President Trump is failing? What if they're saying he's delivering and the country's splitting in response? Because President Trump's not like other presidents, and that means we're reading his first year through the wrong lens. Most presidents spend their first year recalibrating. They discover the limits of power and they soften their rhetoric. They explain why campaign promises are harder than expected. And they govern in beige after campaigning in bold color, and President Trump never did that. He's governing exactly the way he campaigned. And he is daring the country to react. He promised to get Trump tough on immigration, and he has. He promised to put America first, even if the allies bristled, and he has. He promised decisive action over consensus. He's delivered it. You can disagree with the choices. A lot of folks do, but you can't credibly argue he misrepresented who he would be. And that's why his polling looks so strange and so stable 1 year in. According to the national polling averages, his job approval sits about 41 to 42%, with disapproval in the mid-50s. And those numbers dominate headlines, but buried in that same data is the statistic that actually defines his first year. According to the Wall Street Journal poll this week, 92% of voters who supported Trump in 2024 still approve of the job he's doing. That's not drift, that's not erosion, that's alignment. He didn't lose America, he kept his people. And there's a shift that explains everything. The polls absolutely reflect what he's doing. They just don't reflect it the way they used to. In past presidencies, performance led to persuasion. A good economy moved numbers up. A crisis moved them down. Voters believed like jurors, weighing evidence and revising judgment. And today, voters behave like mirrors. Trump acts. The people don't reconsider. They read as who they already are. Supporters see delivery. Opponents see confirmation. That same action produces opposite conclusions, and the polls record the split. Well, let's see what else we got going on. The Brooklyn Beckham blasts parents Dave and Victoria, says the family controlled him for years. Well, that's what parents normally do, folks. Brooklyn Beckham is standing up for himself for the first time in his life and has no intention of reconciling with his family. He addresses the ongoing family feud publicly for the first time. Were I him, I'd be complaining about the name Brooklyn. On Monday, Victoria and David Beckham's oldest son took to Instagram and shared a lengthy statement about his relationship with his parents. He said, "I've been silent for years, made every effort to keep these matters private," he said. He said his parents have gone to the press, which left him with no choice but to address the family rift publicly. He said, "I don't want to reconcile to my family. I'm not being controlled. I'm standing up for myself for the first time in my life. For my entire life, my parents have controlled narratives in the press about our family." He said for his entire life, his parents have controlled narratives in the press with performative social media posts, family events, and inauthentic relationships. And recently, he's seen with his own eyes the links they'll go to place countless lies in the media, mostly at the expense of innocent people, to preserve their own facade. He's 26 and went on to say his parents have been trying endlessly to ruin his relationship with Nicola Pelitz long before they tied the knots. He addressed the rumored feud that began between Nicole and Victoria after the former Spice Girl stopped designing her future daughter-in-law's wedding dress in the 11th hour. Well, there's always a family dynamic. There's no question about that. And he alleged that Dave and Victoria reportedly pressured and attempted to bribe him into signing away rights to his name. Well, with the name of Brooklyn, I'd be more than happy to give somebody the rights to my name. Go get a name that's less divisive, I guess you could say. Well, President Trump has fired off a late-night Truth Social post doubling down on Greenland ambitions. He's been pressing for the U.S. to acquire Greenland, continued to beat the drum on the issue early on this morning. He said, I had a very good telephone call to Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, concerning Greenland. I agreed to a meeting of the various parties in Davos, Switzerland. As I expressed to everybody very plainly, Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There's no going back. On that, everybody agreed, the president declared in a post on Truth Social. He's slated to speak at the World Economic Forum annual meeting tomorrow. So we'll see what comes of that, if anything. Greenland may be the 51st state. You never can tell. Well, quiet changes in American paychecks point to new economic strength. American paychecks are growing stronger as Main Street shows new economic strength. Inflation is still well above the Federal Reserve's 2% long-run target, and that remains a concern. Recent economic data shows signs of growing strength on Main Street as Americans' take-home pay goes higher and contributes to rising retail sales and home purchases, though there are some headwinds that remain. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released last week shows average weekly earnings increased 1.42% after accounting for inflation from January to December 2025. Retail spending rose 3.3% on a year-over-year basis in November, was up 0.6% from the prior month after October's data was revised to a 0.1% monthly decline, according to the Census Bureau data released this week. So we'll see what if things do get better. It would be nice. Well, T-Rex didn't become an 8-ton giant overnight, according to scientists. They're revealing how long the apex predator took to grow. A group of researchers estimated how long it took Tyrannosaurus rex to reach its full size, and a time period significantly longer than scientists previously believed. This dinosaur is believed to have been Earth's largest land predator, and may have taken about 40 years, not 30, to reach its full size, according to this new study. Findings were published in the journal Peer-J. The growth trajectory is more gradual than expected. The lead authority of the study, Holly Woodward of Oklahoma State University, told Reuters, rather than T-Rex ratcheting up to adult size quickly, it spent a lot of time of its life at a juvenile to subadult size, according to the paleontologist. And that study analyzed bone tissue, microstructure, and the leg bones of 17 T-Rex fossils, discovering it took about 4 decades for the dinosaur to reach its maximum size of roughly 8 tons. Well, at least it did get there. Well, Iranian leaders threatened all-out war as tensions with the U.S. reached fever pitch. Yes, Iran is threatening to go to war with the U.S. That'd be an interesting battle to see. The Ayatollah found himself looking for another place to hide. Well, Ananias agitator who stormed Minnesota church services also harassed congregants at Pig Headset's church. One of the Ananias agitators who stormed into Twin Cities church Sunday has also been accused of harassing congregants at Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's church in Washington, D.C. Ananias agitator stormed city's church sanctuary on Sunday, causing chaos and insisting that one of the pastors in the church is the acting director of ICE's St. Paul field office. Protesters are heard shouting "ICE out" and "Justice for Renee Good" in the middle of services in front of shocked congregants. Man with the group was identified as William Keller. He goes by DeWoke Farmer on TikTok, where he's over 66,000 followers and is currently posting politically charged videos attacking ICE. President Trump, members of his administration with profanity. Member of Christ Church in Washington, D.C., who asked to remain anonymous, told Fox News Digital he immediately recognized Kelly as part of a group that had been pestering worshipers on a routine basis. Well, He said, William Kelly's a regular outside our church. He screams incredibly vile and gross things at families, at children, at people. He's called my wife the C word, a whore and a Nazi breeder, and all sorts of things, according to a Christ Church member. Well, there's all kinds of crazy people out there. No question about that. Well, the study has revealed how rapidly weight comes back after quitting obesity medication. If you're discontinuing the use of GLP-1 weight loss medication, and that triggers weight regain more than previously thought, a new study suggested. This research, which was published in the BMJ, found that stopping the drugs is also associated with reversible improvements in heart and metabolic health, including cholesterol and blood pressure. University of Oxford researchers analyzed 37 studies published up to February 2025 involving more than 9,000 participants who had undergone an average of 39 weeks of weight loss treatment. Well, looks like when the weight starts, even trying to get it off can be an issue. Well, according to Christian leaders, faith has returned to the public square during President Trump's second term. President Trump is garnering praise from a prominent faith leader, says the White House is reinforcing the religious revival growing across America, as churches report growing attendance and younger parishioners. There's a causality from the culture into politics, and from politics that influences the culture, and that's what we're seeing that duality play out, according to J.P. DeGance, founder and president of Communio, a nonprofit ministry and that trains churches on how to evangelize. Religious non-affiliation has been growing for about 40 years, and it's flatlined over the past 4 years, and that's a real change in trends. DeGance said the Communio had heard anecdotally that churches across the country have seen major increases in new member classes. Well, maybe there's hope for the future. Well, independent journalist Nick Sorda is accused the legacy media of covering up Minnesota riots. Yes, there's a lot of accusations against the mainstream media. They seem to want to live in a fantasy world, and they want the rest of us in there with them. Well, Congress opens industrial scale fraud probe in Minnesota, and warns Waltz demands are just beginning. Minnesota is going to be the first state that will be in the crosshairs of a groundbreaking and comprehensive congressional investigation into systemic social services fraud, waste, and abuse. House Energy and Commerce Committee Chairman Brent Guthrie told Fox News Digital. Now, interestingly enough, I've reported fraud, waste, and abuse numerous times to numerous agencies and been ignored completely. But Guthrie's panel is demanding audits and provider records and fraud referrals and internal communications dating back several years, signaling a deep dive into whether state officials ignored warnings or allowed fraud to flourish while working with a major HHS sub-agency to help look at the misuse of taxpayer dollars on a wide scale. The extensive fraud schemes being perpetrated in Minnesota have wreaked havoc on government-funded health programs, according to the committee. And a joint statement from Guthrie and Representative John Joyce of Pennsylvania and Morgan Griffith of Virginia, both who are Republicans. So maybe something will come to pass. Well, now that we have finished the long-awaited news segment, let's go back to the story we had started on. We were talking about hacking and some of the information that's come to light through hackers who have released information they found in the computer banks of Wright-Patterson. Turns out NBC has access to the actual files that the hacker obtained. With such priceless material in hand, they chose to show it on screen. One portion read Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, cataloged UFO parts list, an underground facility for foreign technology. At that point, the camera panned away, and the remaining segment of the material was not referenced in text format, but as they revealed, at least part of the material downloaded by the hacker did indeed reference alien autopsy data stored on the Wright-Patterson computers. Well, such was the interest and furor that followed that NBC a year later chose to return to the story and made a public statement regarding the hacker. the material that had been found and all the implications that it gave rise to. The producer of that particular segment was Susan Adams. Not only was she amazed by the incredible revelations, but Adams also decided to share further data on the revelations. She confirmed that the hacker had been willing to show what he knew when he got a cast iron guarantee his identity would never, ever be released or compromised. NBC's lawyers prepared the required paperwork to ensure that everybody was comfortable with the story being filmed and broadcast. And the primary reason was because the hacker was engaging in was essentially illegal activity that was going to be covered up by a mainstream media network. Certainly, hacking U.S. military computer systems is something nobody should be thinking about engaging in. And as the Bevan situation showed, he was extraordinarily lucky not to find himself behind bars. Interestingly enough, the Air Force and the staff at Wright-Patterson kept a complete silence on the issue. It was thought they were concerned about taking legal action against both the hacker and NBC. Their actions would come on even more revelations concerning UFOs at Wright-Patterson. Most folks think that's the most likely scenario. And it's not just at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that computerized files in both UFOs and alien bodies have allegedly been stored. Investigators at Donald Smith, and Kevin Randall have learned that such material may also be held at the North American Air Defense Command at Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado Springs. You know it as NORAD. Commenting on those who had either direct or indirect access to actual crash-recovered exhibits of alien technology or alien remains, Kevin Randall, and I know both those individuals, stated there are others, however, who have first-hand experiences who didn't see the bodies. They, through their work with the military, saw files containing notes about the crashes and photographs of the bodies. One of those is a man who said he worked at NORAD in Colorado Springs. In the course of computerizing some files, I came across one labeled United States Army Air Force Early Automation. And that file dealt with the recovery of several small bodies, including black and white photos of them. Man said the bodies were small, no more than 4 or 5 feet tall, and they had big heads. Well, one of the most controversial of all of Bob Lazar's claims is that he read a series of highly classified documents on various aspects of the UFO phenomena. One of those documents, he maintained, told a strange and almost sinister story about a violent confrontation between security personnel at Area 51 and a group of aliens who were in residence and working at S4 alongside a scientific team. It was a confrontation that reported resulted in more than a few deaths, many more than a few. To his credit, Lazar has admitted he can't say for sure that the briefing papers he read were the real thing. He's acknowledged they have been disinformation designed to swamp him with both real and bogus material. So you have to ask, why might project leaders at Area 51 do such a thing? Well, if they were concerned that Lazar might blow the whistle on what he knew, which is history has shown he did in 1989, maybe mixing up the truth with a more liberal number of lies might have had an adverse effect on his credibility. Should be noted that's exactly what did happen. And that said, and although he can't say for sure the documentation was the real deal, he does recall the contents of the material in relation to this firefight situation. According to Lazar, the deadly confrontation occurred at some point in 1979 in the S4 facility. He said, I believe the altercation came about in 1979 or sometime about that period. I don't remember exactly how it started, but it had something to do with the security personnel. Aliens were in a separate room. I think it had something to do with the bullets the security guards were carrying, and somehow they were trying to be told that they couldn't enter that area with the bullets, possibly because it was hazardous. The bullets could explode, although through some sort of field that was in use. Lazar continued, despite the warnings, one security guard did indeed enter the room with the bullets, something that resulted in a violent and lethal response from the aliens. Lazar recalled that the papers he read described how the security personnel were all quickly killed by head wounds. Same fate befell a group of scientists on the program as well. Timothy Good, who interviewed Lazar at the height of the controversy surrounding his claim, said the incident is said to have led to the termination of an alien liaison at the Nevada test site. Now, it's important to note a variation on this story. It didn't come from Lazar, who stuck to the story he read out at S4, but from a man by the name of Paul Benowitz. When in the late 70s began digging into claims that an alien base existed below the New Mexico town of Dulce, New Mexico. Been there and did some stories on that. In fact, I've got a book out called The Secrets of Dulce. You can also get it on Amazon Kindle. From intelligence personnel at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, Benowitz learned of a story of a fatal encounter between hostile aliens and the security team in the lower levels of the Dulce base. Different location given to Benowitz is just about the only difference between what Lazar was told and what Benowitz was told. Clearly, both scenarios can't be true, which, just like several of Lazar's revelations, mean we have to give deep consideration to the possibility the papers that Lazar read were not the real deal. May well have been disinformation, and so might have been the data provided to Benowitz. Trying to unravel the issue, we're going to look at the story of Paul Benowitz and his deep throat type sources at Kirtland. Now, from what's certainly a picturesque area on the map, the New Mexico town of Dulce, that I spent several days at, it's located in the north of the county in Rio Arriba County, and it's an area steeped in mystery. What's certainly a picturesque area on the map, the New Mexican town of Dulce, located in the northern Rio Arriba County, is steeped in mystery. Also home to several thousand people and has a square mileage of barely 13. Its origins date back to the 19th century. It's not what goes on at Dulce that concerns this show. Rather, it's what's said to be going on far below the town, in myriad tunnels and caverns and caves and hollowed-out chambers that are said to be where untold numbers of dangerous and hostile aliens live. Even worse, the U.S. government's had a fear of God, or maybe the aliens put him, to such an extent they don't dare descend into that deadly dark realm far below Dulce's Archuleta Mesa. Now, today, there are tales of underground bases in which nefarious experimentation is widespread. They're all over the internet. Just type underground base and UFOs into any search engine, you'll find an endless array of tales of the controversial kind. They're overflowing with paranoia and tales of menace. These tales are far less told in the 70s, which is when the Dulce stories began to surface, specifically in the later part of the decade. What makes the Dulce story so notable is that the initial rumors about the vast alien facility miles below ground level came not from wide-eyed conspiracy theorists, but from a number of people who work deep in the clandestine worlds of counterintelligence and disinformation. Now, the latter is described as false information deliberately and often covertly spread, as by the planning of rumors, in order to influence public opinion or obscure the truth. Where counterintelligence is defined as organized activity of an intelligence service designed to block an enemy's sources of information, or maybe deceive the enemy, or prevent sabotage, and to gather political and military information. In other words, we're talking about spies and secret agents and lies that might be truths and truths that might be lies. As for the Dulce story, it suggests that when a violent, deadly altercation occurred at the Dulce base at some point in 1979, the U.S. military, along with numerous scientists and engineers, were forced to flee for their lives. What had begun as a fairly amicable arrangement between the aliens of the black-eyed gray type and the government team was now over, and irreversibly so. Dulce base was now in the hands of a band of extraterrestrials who said they were done with the human race. Now, if you don't fail to note, this is very similar to the story told to Bob Lazar in the latter part of 1988, but that scenario given to him, it was at S4 rather than at Dulce where this deadly confrontation took place. Unless both stories are true, which is unlikely because they're almost identical in nature, then it's highly likely that somewhere deceit is at work. Now, back in the 1970s, Paul Benowitz, who died in 2003 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had his own company that stood adjacent to Kirtland Air Force Base. His company was called Thunder Scientific. All was good, as Benowitz had a number of good contracts with the military, and living and working so close to the base made things comfortable and handy for him. Perfect relationship until it wasn't. In shockingly quick time, Benowitz's life began to fragment in chaotic fashion. But you have to ask yourself how and why did such a thing happen? Now, one thing to be noted is by the late 1970s, Benowitz had been interested in UFOs not just for years, but for decades. Had a huge library of books and subscribed to a number of newsletters and magazines on the subject. On occasion, he'd seen, late at night and early hours of the morning, strange, unidentified objects flying over Kirtland Air Force Base and nearby Manzano Mountains. They could have been early drone-like craft being tested secretly, but for Benowitz, he was sure they were alien craft. Now, you have to say his head spun. He came to believe the aliens are in league with the U.S. Air Force and that much of the secret program was being run out of Kirtland. shared his views with the staff at Kirtland, CIA, and the NSA, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Pentagon, and his own senator, his congressman, and just about everybody in a position of power and influence. So it was all but inevitable that by firing off lengthy letters about secret alien human operations at Kirtland, somebody's going to take notice. That's exactly what happened. While one school of thought suggested Benowitz was indeed tracking the movements of UFOs in the skies over Kirtland, another suggested Benowitz had actually stumbled on test flights of new and radical aircraft of the aforementioned drone kind. In the latter scenario, the government, as a collective term for all the agencies and individuals that he approached, decided to first politely and then quietly seek a request that Benowitz bring his research to a halt. That's like a red flag to a bull. Benowitz didn't hear none of it. He was primed and ready to go after the U.S. government and confirm what he saw as the dark and sinister truth of Uncle Sam's liaison with aliens. One man against the government. It was clear who was going to win, though Benowitz couldn't see such a thing at all. Now, the fact that all the data was coming to him from verifiable insider sources impressed Benowitz and led him to believe that their every word was true. An ingenious fashion, but from the perspective of Benowitz, in terrible fashion, a plot was initiated to essentially give him exactly what he wanted to hear. So well-placed government agents, intelligence operatives, and experts in the field of counterintelligence and disinformation all fed Benowitz fictitious, tales of dangerous ETs, of thousands of people abducted and mind-controlled in slave-like fashion by the aliens, of terrible experiments undertaken on people but held below the Dulce base, and of a looming confrontation between the human race and the deadly creatures from another galaxy. The fact that data was all coming to him from verifiable insider sources impressed him and led him to believe their every word, which is precisely what the government was gambling on. The government didn't tighten the noose even more around Benowitz's neck. It fed him more and more horror stories of the alien variety, and slowly and bit by bit, his paranoia grew. Anybody walked casually past the family home, they just had to be a government agent. If the phone rang but stopped ringing before he had a chance to get to it, then he knew it was a sign of intimidation from them. Couldn't sleep, became stressed to the point where he required medication, and eventually had a nervous collapse and was hospitalized. The end result of this is he walked away from UFOs, secret projects, and cosmic conspiracies as a crushed man, which may well have been the intent of the government anyway. Although the saga of Paul Benowitz began in the latter part of the 1970s and pretty much over by the early mid-80s, the story of the Dulce base developed legs. These are legs that are still walked to this very day, primarily because so many people within ufology find the tales of the underground base exciting. And it really is that simple, and the government has, to a degree, continued to encourage the wilder and darker side of ufology as a means to further darken the waters of what it's really up to when it comes to new and advanced aircraft that a lot of folks see as UFOs. And that said, though, some people absolutely stand by the claims that a huge underground installation does exist below Dulce. And when I was there doing research for my book, a lot of folks told me a lot of tales about things that they had seen and come across up on Archuleta Mesa, and what was supposed to be entrances to the underground base. In many respects, the newer tales are even stranger, more horrifying than those that Benowitz had put down his throat in the early 80s. There was an interesting program I heard about. It's called Project Gas Buggy. There's a plan to set off a nuclear device underground in order to extract natural gas, but there actually had been a plan to wipe out the aliens who had taken over the Dulce underground facility. I heard discussions of both sides when I was there, and I stayed in contact with some of the people I met while I was there. And you might check out the book, Secrets of Dulce. You go to Amazon Kindle, look up Ken Hudnall, and you'll see a long list of them, and as of yesterday, it was 110. You know, being forced to medically retire as a result of my military service, other than sit and stare at the wall or watch shorts on the internet, I write books. Well, admittedly, it's intriguing to note that Dulce is indeed saturated in weirdness, some of which occurred long before Benowitz came on the scene, more than a decade before he came to believe the rumors of about Dulce were true, the U.S. government already had a stake in the area. A contingent of the Atomic Energy Commission rode into town and set up the project I talked about, Project Gas Buggy. It was a sub-project of a much bigger project called Plowshare. The plan was to detonate way below Dulce a small nuclear device as a means to try to extract natural gas. The operation went ahead on December 10th, 1967, and it worked all too well. The bomb was detonated at a depth of more than 4,000 feet. Years later, though, researchers suggested the natural gas scenario was a cover for something else. Well, clearly you know where this is going. Ufology enduringly believed the nuke was actually used by a panicked government to try to wipe out the alien base, and the extraterrestrials said to live deep inside it. And to this day, it's illegal to dig in the area on the orders of the Atomic Energy Commission. They have deep ties to Area 51, don't you know? Moving on from 1975 to 79, the town of Dulce was hit by numerous cattle mutilations. Back helicopters soared across the skies of town by night, sometimes incredibly, silently. Strange lights were seen flitting around Dulce's huge Archuleta Mesa. Cows were found with organs removed and blood drained from their corpses. The incisions looked as if they were done by lasers. For those who might find all this just to be a little bit too incredible, it's worth noting the FBI was heavily involved in the investigations of the mutilations at Dulce and now placed its files on the mystery and on its website. It's called The Vault, don't you know? It's a file that reads like science fiction and runs to more than 100 pages. And as we have seen before, strong evidence exists that the silent black helicopters had their origins at Area 51. In the post-Benowitz area, other figures came forward with their very own tales of Dulce and its subterranean nightmare. Whether they were telling the truth or were fed lies and disinformation by government agents is very much open to interpretation. One account came from Jason Bishop III, who I had the opportunity to know, which is an alias for another alias belonging to Tal Levesque. No wonder the Dulce saga so confusing. Levesque, or Bishop, or whatever you want to call him, published what he claimed were the words of a former employee at the base, Thomas Costello. According to Costello, level 7 is worse, row after row of thousands of humans and human mixtures in cold storage. And here, too, are embryo storage vats of humanoids in various stages of development. He said, I frequently encountered the humans in cages, usually dazed or drugged, but sometimes they cried and begged for help. We were told they were hopelessly insane, involved in high-risk drug tests to cure insanity. And we were told to never try to speak to them at all. At the beginning, believed that story, and finally, in 1978, a small group of workers discovered the truth. Well, then, according to Alan B. DeWalton, who also wrote about the claimed firefight that led to the hasty retreat of the U.S. military, in his controversial work, The Dulce Book, he stated the human body surrounded by the etheric body, surrounded by the astral body, surrounded by the mental body. On this same issue, an insider told DeWalton we actually have an extra body, the emotional body that the aliens don't have. This part of us constantly puts out a kind of energy they can't generate or simulate. This emotional energy is to them like a potent, much sought-after drug. They can take it out of us and bottle it, so to speak, and doing this harvesting, grays will look directly in our eyes if they're drinking something or basking in light. Well, in 1991, Valdemar Valerian's book, Matrix 2, hit the bookshelves. Referred to a female abductee had seen in the Dulce base a vat full of red liquid and body parts of humans and animals, and she could see grays bobbing up and down in it, almost swimming. In 2015, Joshua Cutchin wrote a book called A Trojan Feast, the food and drink offerings of aliens and fairies and Sasquatch. And his words are somewhat chilling, to say the very least. He said, while abduction research doesn't overtly suggest the aliens are harvesting people for consumption, there may be a grain of truth to the report contained in the pages of Valerian's Matrix 2. Nourishments ingested by smearing a soupy mixture of biologicals on the epidermis. Food sources include bovine, cattle, and human parts distilled into a high-protein broth. And so you have to ask yourself at this point, what are we to make of all this? Undoubtedly, certain portions of this story given to Benowitz from the late 70s to early mid-80s sounds unbelievable, and they may well have been. Certainly the plan seems to have been designed to mentally destabilize Benowitz, which is exactly what did happen. He became a definitive shell of his former self. The fact that a very similar tale of violent firefights between security personnel and aliens was given to Bob Lazar, but with the location changed from the underground realms of Dulce to the highly classified S4 facility in the Nevada desert, strongly suggests we ought to proceed with deep caution when it comes to evaluating Lazar's recollections of this particular story. Excuse me, not because he was a liar, but because he may well have been fed lies, which is a very different thing altogether. All this inevitably reflects on the testimony of all the other whistleblowers whose stories we've talked about and studied, others whose testimony is still to come. Was Fritz Werner speaking truthfully about the 1953 crash of a UFO in May of 1853, an incident that deeply links to the Nevada test and training range? How about the story of John, who spent a year or so working out at Area 51? Over time, he came to suspect that what he read was deliberate disinformation. But what reason he couldn't fully fathom, but probably somehow it was connected to a program designed to deceive the Russians on what was going on at the base. Well, I made one misstep about the statement from Fritz Werner. The crash he talked about was May of 1953, not 1853. Maybe the goal of the staff at Area 51 wasn't to fully confirm or to deny the claims of alien activity at Area 51, but to confuse the matter. After all, having researchers chasing leads and threats and tales that ultimately prove nothing might be the aim, because such leads and tales are actually a mixture of fact and well-placed and well-thought-out disinformation. So when a leak occurs, as it most assuredly did with Bob Lazar in 1989, those at Area 51 might certainly be concerned, but they can also be fairly safe in the knowledge that that same whistleblower will be sharing data that's false. And it can be shown to be false. In that sense, Bob Lazar may very well have told 100% truth, but they were truths as he saw them, not as they actually were. When he said he read classified files on a 1979 shootout at Area 51, he was almost certainly speaking honestly, but that didn't mean the data given to him by his colleagues was real. And that goes for Paul Benowitz as well, whose tales eerily mirror those of Lazar. What all this demonstrates is that despite the I want to believe factor that hovers around so many of the alien-driven stories out at Area 51, we need to proceed with a great deal of caution and skepticism, but in the process, certainly not dismissing the possibility that aliens might be housed and working in below-surface facilities at Area 51 in Dulce, New Mexico. Keep your minds open, of course, but not open to the point of uncritical gullibility. Now, one of the most surprising of all the revelations made by Bob Lazar was that by 1988-89, the team out at S4 had made very little progress when it came to the matter of trying to understand the alleged extraterrestrial technology. In fact, at times it sounded like an environment was more akin to a museum than a place where high-tech research and development was speeding along. And to some degree, the image mirrors the final scenes of that hit 1981 movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, which stars Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. In those final moments, we'll see the Ark of the Covenant, which the Nazis were desperate to get their hands on, hidden away from just about everybody as a result of its awesome destructive power. Could it be true that rather than having duplicated alien technology, the staff at S4 are in a very similar position? Got a mountain of alien-originated technology, but no significant way to use it. A lack of understanding of the alien science may have ensured that much of the recovered material is just sitting on shelves, boxed up, and remaining largely untouched until our science catches up. If creatures from another world really did crash on the Earth in July of 1947, we're talking about the Roswell affair, of course, and wound up at Area 51, why is it that the material evidence has never surfaced? That important issue aside, Roswell is an event as a matter of record. The case has, after all, been the subject of numerous nonfiction books, has been featured in a near endless number of TV series and documentaries and movies and novels. Controversy has also been the focus of 2 U.S. Air Force investigations and a report by the Government Accountability Office. Regardless of what really happened on that now infamous remote ranch all those years ago, Roswell is the cornerstone of ufology. There's no doubt about that. To ufology, Roswell is what the 1967 Patterson film is to Bigfoot research, and what the 1945 disappearance of Flight 19 is to those who believe in the existence of the Bermuda Triangle. Well, the mainstream opinion of a lot of folks is the U.S. government and that word is used as a catch-all term for the U.S. Air Force, the intelligence community, and elected officials, is today out of the loop when it comes to knowing the full, expurgated facts surrounding Roswell. Far more likely, Roswell's secrets are maintained by a kind of shadow agency, a group that is answerable to nobody, not officially known to exist, and funded in a deeply clandestine fashion. And it's almost certainly operated out of Area 51. It's one thing to have a secret group that oversees the Roswell case at S4, but it is, however, quite another issue for this group to have successfully hidden every bit of wreckage, every single page of every single document ever prepared on the event, and even highly classified photos, all without making a single mistake. That's not the government as we know it, folks. They make many mistakes. How is such a thing possible for them to absolutely make no mistakes? Let's face it, we hear numerous stories of extraterrestrial debris found on the Foster Ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico, which is supposedly back-engineered, maybe at Area 51 elsewhere. We're told the Roswell technology and materials played major roles in the development of everything from night vision goggles to integrated circuits and for lasers and fiber optics. The stories are true, even if just a few of them are true. And such programs have been would have required the dedicated secret work of countless people and numerous companies and industries. With so many scientists and personnel involved, and combined with the reams of paperwork these studies and research would surely have generated since 1947, is it too much to expect not even one legitimate smoking gun would surface? Something is, in my humble opinion, wrong with that picture. You know, if the debris found at various crash sites, and you might also check out my book, Beyond Roswell, which talks about crashes that the government does not talk about. But if debris found at various crash sites have been used to develop inventions such as integrated circuits and fiber optics, that implies there has to be a lot of people involved that know the origins of these technologies. I even listened to one of supposedly intelligent people lecturing a group about the fact that Velcro actually came from the aliens. Since they clearly don't have that much sought-after smoking gun, the skeptics conclude that that's because it doesn't exist. But there's another angle that needs to be addressed. It's an angle to which few people have given much thought. What if the aliens did crash into Mexico in 1947? But very little, if indeed any, notable progress has been made in studying and understanding alien technology. And more to the crux of the matter, what if the recovered evidence has barely been investigated in the slightest? Taking things a step further than that, what if the material is so baffling and appropriately alien that it's just been hidden away museum style? And that's all that's been done with it. Such a scenario might sound strange, but maybe not. What if all the stories of back engineering are bogus and were designed at the height of the Cold War to unnerve and confuse the Soviets? What if the reality is that zero progress has been made when it comes to the examination of Roswell materials? And that's very close to the scenario that Lazar described. And now with that said, let's go back to Roswell. And despite what's been stated about a UFO crashing into Mexico in 1947, the fact is that for the most part, we actually have very few credible stories of a UFO being found on the Foster Ranch. We have chiefly reports of a massive field of debris and a varying number of bodies of perceived non-human origin. What if all the stories of back engineering and bogus were designed to unnerve and confuse the Soviets? I'll go back to that idea again and again. Consider the possibility this is all that the theoretical group that oversees the Roswell affair has in its possession. No power plant, no strange engine, no flight deck, no fuel tank, just a lot of mystifying so-called memory metal, as the debris is described on account of its mysterious ability to spring back to its original shape even after being crushed. And as for the bodies, well, they're in fairly good shape or pulverized and shattered. What if studies have yielded very little beyond the conclusion they aren't exactly what you'd call locals? How is it even possible for us not to have made any progress since 1947? The answer to that question is very easy. That's how. Imagine sending a modern-day car back in time and, say, 300 years and dumping it where it's sure to be found. And the finest minds of that era would very likely be able to conclude it was designed to transport people from one place to another. And if the ignition key was turned on, the engine would rumble to life and the steering wheel would turn, and chances are those same finest minds would actually be able to drive the car, after some practice, of course. What happens when the car runs out of gas, though? the people of that period are unable to duplicate the fuel the car requires, whether diesel or unleaded gasoline, they'd be left with a shell that offers a lot of potentials, but is as good as dead and useless. That should make us wonder if something similar has happened regarding Roswell. If, of course, the answer goes down an alien path and not a far more down-to-earth one. If all that our theoretical secret group at Area 51 has in its possession is a huge mass of memory metal and a bunch of corpses, and nothing else, then it becomes incredibly easy to understand how very little progress might actually have been made, particularly so if we haven't yet developed adequate means to understand and use the technology we've discovered. The possible outcome, the corpses and debris are stored away somewhere, maybe even barely ever studied until such time as it comes to our technology allows us to have a meaningful scrutiny to be undertaken. Skeptics do admittedly make a very good point that with thousands of people hypothetically working on the analysis of a crashed UFO and its crew, the truth should have surfaced by now, whether by the actions of some Edward Snowden-type character or by accident. The latter maybe being more likely due to the complex logistics of trying to oversee and contain so many interrelated programs and projects. Believers counter this stance by making comparisons to the Manhattan Project that led to the development and deployment of the atomic bomb. It was a program in which massive numbers of people worked, and that project remained secret for years. It did, but not for 70 years, which is basically where we're at with Roswell. Actually, 80 years now. There's a display at the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell, where I spoke for 10 years until I became politically unacceptable to a man whose name I've mentioned in this show. It's believed there are several alien corpses kept at Area 51, and one of the displays at the museum shows scientists doing a dissection on an alien. Now, I want to make it clear at this point, I'm not skeptical in the slightest of the idea that something of significance happened in July 1947. Something did. I want to be very skeptical of the idea that there was supposed UFO back engineering going on all over the map. With all these claims in circulation and numerous programs established to replicate alien technology found outside of Roswell, the smoking gun would not by now have surfaced, and it can be suggested if aliens did die in New Mexico almost 70 years ago, then the Indiana Jones later the Lost Ark scenario may well be the correct one, as incredible and unlikely as that might sound. And on that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We've run out of time. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about the wall of secrecy that has prevented us from knowing the truth about Roswell. It may not have been knocked down, but there have been some holes knocked in it. So until tomorrow, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.